Hello, everybody. Good morning. Still a few minutes till class time, but welcome back, y'all, and hope you're doing well and had a good week. Just have one more meeting right now to get us into our weekend. So appreciate you guys' attendance and participation. We'll get it going in about 2 minutes. Feel free to say hello or just, good morning or anything else if you're here. Hi, Ivan. Good to see you there. Rachel, nice to see you. Hello. Do a lot of you guys have like 9 to 9:50 classes or something? And I'm just curious. Like, you have a little 10-minute window to end one like Zoom meeting and then log on to another live stream or whatever? I'm just kind of curious. It's almost like much different than just moving from one classroom to another room on campus. I can definitely remember being at Chapman and then going from like Beckman over to Argyrios Forum, little 10-minute window. You don't even have that much time to walk. You have an 8 a.m.? Okay, nice. That's a good schedule, Rachel, for sure. Good morning, Martina. Good to see you there. All right, guys. Well, it's now 10, so I'm just going to go ahead and get us started with today's meeting. Hopefully these numbers start to bounce up, but usually in the first couple minutes of class time they do, so I'm not worried. Yeah, so let me just go ahead and tell you about what today's plan is. We're going to start by just summarizing the major notes from the last couple of meetings, finish up the Taylor Cosmological Argument, and then we'll try as best as we can to talk about the writing of William Paley, and then if we have time at the end, we'll talk about Ernest Nagle as well. So I'm going to start off with just some basic review, and good morning and hello to everybody there. As always, it's nice to see you guys, and feel free to chime in, question, comment, or just say hello at any point. I'm always looking at the live chat, so I'll see it. Now, going back to the beginning, we've been studying arguments for the existence of God. We're looking at the philosophy of religion to start the class. The first main argument we looked at was called the Ontological Argument. So I know we've covered it in a lot of depth. I'm just going to briefly run past it. It's the argument which says that the definition of God is the greatest conceivable being, and that means he must exist because it's greater to exist in the mind and in reality than just the mind alone. And therefore, if a being is defined as the greatest conceivable being, it implies that he will exist in both. Otherwise, it wouldn't be the greatest thing you could imagine. So God exists in both the mind and reality. Can't even be thought not to exist. And atheists, I guess he says, just don't have the right concept in their mind because it's not possible to think that God doesn't exist. Now, after that, there were these objections, Galileo, Moore, Rowe. In their different ways, they each tried to show problems with that argument. Galileo said, I could construct an analogy to the argument. Think about the lost island. Define it as the greatest conceivable island. Now, we know there's no such thing, but according to Anselm's logic, I guess it must exist because, as he argues, a thing that exists in the mind alone is not as great as a thing that's in the mind in reality. But it's obviously absurd to suppose that this island has been proven to be real just based on the invention of the idea. So that's Galileo's point. And then Rowe said existence is not a predicate, it's not an attribute of something. William Rowe tried to make the case that you can't prove something exists just by defining it as existing. If that was so, then I could define anything into existence by simply making up a word for existing such and such, like magican, or in my case, unican. Okay, and then we did get into the cosmological argument, switched gears to talk about a new argument for God's existence. Now, we got through most of that, but I kind of just want to summarize and complete the last few notes on it. So let's return our minds for a moment to the cosmological argument topic. As the essay begins, he says, imagine a hypothetical scenario of a person walking in the woods and encountering a big sphere, like a weird object that's kind of not out of place. Good morning, everybody. I see you guys, Celine and Davis. Thank you. Yeah, so there's a sphere in the woods. You came across it. And if you did, since it's so weird and unusual to see there, you'd have thoughts like, what's that doing there? How did that get there? I wonder what the reason or the cause is for this object. Now, we don't normally have those same type of curious thoughts and questions in mind when we see things that are in a normal place. So, you know, if you walk up to a grocery store and you see a shopping cart, you probably don't say, where did this shopping cart start off? What caused it to be here? It's because it's not something weird, so it doesn't trigger any curiosity. But the author points out that you could ask the same question about things that are in a normal place. And of course, even if you don't know the answer, where did it come from, what's the cause of it, even if you don't know the answer to those questions, there has to be an objective answer, because things that exist can't just come from nothing, and they can't just create themselves. So this leads us then to appreciate what he calls the principle of sufficient reason. The principle of sufficient reason now says that if something's true, if something exists, there has to be a cause for it. There has to be a sufficient reason for any fact, even if you're not presently aware of it. So if the sphere was the example, there'd have to be a cause for that. But also, if just anything regular, like my glasses or anything else was the example, the principle also applies to those things, and they must have causes. Okay, after that, there was this discussion of the two types of truths, contingent truths, and on the other hand, necessary truths. So what are the contingent truths? They're things that are true, yes, but they could have been false. They didn't need to happen, even though they did. So things that are true, but there are conceivable circumstances in which they could have turned out false. Like, I don't know, you're watching this lecture right now. I know that's true. But different things could have happened such that you would not have been watching it right now. Like, what if you had just overslept today? Or what if, I don't know, you took on an illness and you didn't feel capable of focusing and therefore you passed over the lecture? Or, you know, what if your computer or Wi-Fi was down? And in that case, you wouldn't be able to log on and watch it. So you're watching it, that's true. But we can imagine situations where you might have missed it. The outcome of an election, like Trump won the presidential election in 2016, but he could have lost if votes had turned out differently. You're a student at Chapman, but I know there probably were other places you could have gone had you made a different decision. I'm glad that you came here, but whatever these events that I'm referring to are contingent truths. They're things that are true, but they didn't have to be if things had gone differently. Now, on the other hand, there are necessary truths, and those are things that are true, but they couldn't even possibly be false. And in that case, you want to think of like math, geometry, logic. 2 + 2 is 4 is not something that has any potential or possibility of being false, unlike I'm watching the lecture right now. So the contingent truths are the kind, for sure, that the principle of sufficient reason applies to. According to the principle, if there's a contingent fact, there has to be a cause for it. Sorry. So returning to the bigger picture of the argument, the universe exists. The universe exists, and we all know that's true. It's claimed to be contingent that it's true. So that means that although the universe exists, it's not, it says there's got to be a cause for the universe. That's where the argument kind of gets to the end, and that's where I think we're ending last lecture. So let me pick it up there for a moment. So there's got to be a cause for this universe. What could the universe's cause be? Now, let me draw this little circle. Suppose this circle with the letter U in it is just the universe. That's the whole universe, everything in it, every object and event, the whole space and time fabric is this circle. Now, what could be the cause of this universe that you see on the board? Can the universe cause itself? So like somehow something in the universe is the cause of the universe. That is clearly not possible. So I'm just going to X that out because that is illogical and absurd. Nothing can cause itself if it's just a contingent being, because in order to cause something, the thing has to already exist, right? So if the universe caused itself, then it would already exist before it caused itself to exist, and that doesn't make sense. How could it be there to cause itself if it's waiting to be caused? Like imagine a person giving birth to themselves. That is just absurd. That can't happen because you'd have to exist before the birth to be the person who gives the birth. That does not make sense. So an object cannot be self-caused. That's a non-starter. So what's the next possibility? Well, we know the universe exists, and we're just asking what could be a cause. If it can't cause itself, could it be caused by something that's different from it, but which is contingent? So you see this little circle with the letter C? That's me just trying to showcase that this thing perhaps is the cause that gives rise to this effect, but it's a contingent being. Now, he says that's also not going to work, though. If you can remember, or if you just have an intuition, tell me why. Why is it that a contingent being couldn't really be the ultimate cause of the universe? That would not explain why the universe exists. If the cause of the universe was itself something contingent, what's problematic about that explanation? Tell me. Let me know. Why couldn't there be a contingent being that causes the universe? He says that's not possible either. Why not? Because why? That's just for you. You got to tell me. Why couldn't it be that it's contingent? Okay, so Alec, because then the cause of the universe would also have to have a cause. Exactly. Suppose that the thing that caused our universe is something that depends on something else, right? For its existence being contingent, it would have to depend on some other cause. That just pushes the question back then. So then in that case, what's the creator of the universe? Well, if it's something that's also contingent, then we still don't have our ultimate origin story. It's just going back and back and back to a further cause, a further contingent thing. And that leads to what's called an infinite regress. Now, this is all thought to be impossible. An infinite regress of causes is impossible and absurd. So infinite regress of causes? No, not possible. If we're asking the question, what's the ultimate cause of everything? What's the cause of the universe? We are not giving an answer if we just say something else that's also not the first thing is the cause of the universe. We're looking for the ultimate beginnings. What's the cause of the whole sequence, not just some link in the causal sequence? So assuming that the cause of the universe is contingent leads us nowhere. It just leads us on towards the question, what's the cause of that, and what's the cause of that? So ultimately, the only thing that can be the beginning of this whole causal sequence has to be something that is not contingent. In other words, the ultimate first cause, the prime mover, has to be what they call necessary being, a necessary truth. Okay, so that's the only picture that will give us a logical answer to the question, what is the cause of the universe? It has to be something along these lines. Here's the universe, and it's caused by a necessary being. Now that necessary being there, God, is not contingent. So that being, the creator, doesn't depend on anything else for its existence, but everything else depends on him. So everything depends on God, but God depends on nothing or no one. God is simply independent, necessary, and everything flows from him, but he has no higher cause or higher being that is responsible for his existence. Parker, you say, why can't the universe just be the necessary being? Very clever and good point. We are actually going to talk about that in just a bit. Later to follow in today's meeting, we're going to exactly examine objections just like that. Ernest Nagle makes that exact point. So your finger is on the button of an important response. Yes, but let's just take one thing at a time. I want to make sure we understand and appreciate the argument itself, but we will definitely try to find those flaws and poke holes in it, no problem. Davey, because of Newton's first law of motion, an object will not change its motion unless a force acts on it. Yes, so you can argue that there has to be an initiator of all these changes to get them going, and that they can't initiate it on their own. There has to be some external source of motion and change to bring these things into being. And that claim is that God is the sort of self-standing, necessary being from which all of these changes could issue. That would give an explanation for the existence and nature of the closed physical system of the universe that we have. But it still leaves the concept of God quite mysterious, to be honest. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay, guys, so last word, I'm going to recap this big argument. It starts with the sphere thing, but that's just really to get you to think about the principle of sufficient reason. The principle of sufficient reason says if there's something that exists, it has to have a cause. Then there's contingent and necessary truths. Contingent truths could have been false. Necessary truths could never have been false. The universe exists. It appears that that's contingent. So that means that the principle of sufficient reason would apply to it, and there must be a cause of the universe. Now, the last part of the argument is just what could be the cause of the universe? Okay, well, it can't cause itself. That's just impossible. If it's something that's contingent which causes the universe, this is not going to give us an ultimate sensible answer, because it still leaves us wondering what is the cause of that cause. And if you say there's an actual infinite series of causes, then it's like the series is all absurd altogether, because what causes the series to exist in the first place? Therefore, he says the only real viable possible explanation for the cause of the contingent universe, the cosmos, is a necessary being that is not itself contingent. In other words, God. Now, notice that no specific claim is made about what the details of God are, like what religion God wants us to follow or what his doctrines are. So the argument doesn't like make a case for a specific version of religion, like the God of Christianity, Judaism, Islam. It just says there's a creator God, which is a necessary being, and that's the cause of the universe, which leaves open the possibility for any of these particular religious traditions to fill in the gaps as to what God is presumed to be or what he wants us to do. So understand, it's not directed narrowly at just a Christian audience or a Muslim audience or a Jewish audience. It's towards the notion of a creator God that's a necessary being, which is something that all of them at least hold in common. And then specific differences among the religions that's just a matter of doctrine, not a matter of the philosophy of arguing for the existence of the creator. Okay, so that's the cosmological argument, guys. That adds to our growing roster of topics and concepts. So we've covered ontological, 3 objections to it, now the cosmological argument. But there's more. So we are going to continue going through these big arguments for God's existence. To me, there's kind of like a big 3. There's the ontological, cosmological, and then this one, which is called the argument from design. So now we're going to break open that discussion. What's up with the argument from design? This is another attempt to try and make the case that God exists. And all of these different arguments for God's existence, they go about their business a little differently, right? Ontological argument, it's all about the definition of God in the mind, and that's supposed to lead to a bridge to the conclusion that he really exists in reality too. So it's from the definition of greatest being to the conclusion he exists. Cosmological argument is all about cause and effect, like everything that exists had to have a cause. So what's the cause of the universe? Can't be something that needs its own cause. It's got to be something that ultimately explains everything, and that's a necessary being. Now, a third argument for God's existence is given, which got its own method. The argument from design. Okay. So this argument here, the argument from design, is our new focus for a moment here. Now, there are many written versions of this argument. So it's not only this one author who's ever discussed it, but we're looking at one version of it written by a British philosopher who was also a priest, and this is William Paley. So William Paley lived from 1743 until 1805, and in the year 1800 he wrote a book which contains this argument in it. So we're looking at the work of William and the argument from design he published in a book in 1800, okay, kind of closer to the end of his life. So that's just author, titles, and dates. But now let's get into the argument itself. So he starts off this essay by, again, presenting to the reader a hypothetical scenario. I think I've mentioned before that those are common in philosophy, the presentation of thought experiments, as they're sometimes called, hypothetical scenarios, if you will, where we are just trying to focus your mind on particular ideas or concepts to present an argument. Gamillo gave the hypothetical case of the lost island. Taylor talked about the sphere in the woods. So Paley has an example to provide to try and get our minds focused on his topic here. And ironically, just coincidentally, it also involves a person walking through the woods. So back to the woods. Suppose you're walking around the woods and you come across, so he says, first you come across a rock, just a random rock. And he says, if you saw a rock, you might not think anything of it. You might be like, whatever, this rock has perhaps always been here. Maybe the woods has always been here. But Then he changes the example. He says, suppose, though, that you then came across not a rock, but a watch. You know, like I'm wearing a watch. Like you see a watch on the forest floor. Okay, now, what is it about this watch that he says you would know for sure? He says you know right away. It's very clear. It's very obvious and evident. It is self-evident that the watch can only come from one particular type of source. What is the cause of a watch? What is the only type of thing that could produce a watch? Where there's a watch, there had to be a what? Since the watch exists, think about the watch and what watches do and what they're like. That's something, yes, Parker, that's something that had to have been made by a watchmaker. Okay, good. Same, Davey. It had to be created by a watchmaker. Now, what is it about the watch, though, which makes that so intuitively obvious? That it's not something that could come any other way into the world. It takes an intelligent designer, it takes an intelligent creator for there to be watches. What is it about a watch that allows you to know that it is only possible to have been created by an intelligent designer? Why? I mean, it's true, but let's just try and list a reason or something. Like, what would you say in reaction? The complexity of it, good, Ivan, right? So there's a lot of inner complexity to the watch. All the little parts have to be just so carefully assembled so as to produce the function of telling time. So it's intricate, exactly. Intricate and complex. Those are good and similar comments. It's not just that, though. It's the fact that it's intricate and complex and that it can, as you correctly say, Davis, measure time, that it's a time measurement device. So it has a function and a purpose, the purpose of time telling and timekeeping. And in order for it to provide that function, all the little parts have to be just so carefully assembled so that they work in the way that allows it to do its job. So he has a principle that comes from this example. And the principle is that if there is something with a purpose or a function or a lot of internal complexity, right, then that thing must have had an intelligent designer. Okay, so here's the principle. The watch example is given. And these examples and hypothetical scenarios, you know, it's like they're just to bring a moral, to derive like a little moral from the story, if you will, a principle. So in this watch example, the takeaway point is, point taken, if there's something with a purpose or a function, it must have had an intelligent designer. Okay, so yeah, noticing a watch on the ground or anywhere really would be to find an object that strikes you evidently as something having been made by an intelligent designer. And why? Because again, it's a thing that can tell time, and it has to be very carefully arranged and assembled in such a way that it can do that thing. Now, right, look, imagine that our universe never had life in it. Of course, here we are, life forms, and very good to be here. But suppose that either never there was life or life goes extinct. Will there be watches ever again, or in the case where the extinction event happens, or would there ever have been watches in the first place if intelligent life never evolved? Of course not. It takes a being that has a mind with intelligence to try and gather the raw materials out of nature, assemble them in such a way that we can produce an object that produces a function. Okay, so without life forms with intelligence, there wouldn't be watches. And it's not just watches, right? Why does he give the example of the watch? Well, keep in mind the time when he wrote this. It's 1800. So even though there are different interesting technological items that he could have used, telescopes or anything else, he chose the watch. In our day, 2020, we could use any number of more additional examples. Like you come across, I don't know, a cell phone somewhere that's lying on the ground. You'd know that the cell phone had to have come from an intelligent creator because it's an object that has the ability to perform the function of telecommunications, web browsing, taking photos, and something that has all these little carefully arranged parts and produces a function like that can only come from some intelligence. It could be the computer that you're watching this on, right? Of course, something that is able to produce the computing functions that we're using can't just come about on its own or without the activity of an intelligence. So I'm just telling you, his watch example generalizes across the board to anything in the world that has a purpose or function, and he just chooses that example as his chosen example. But I could use these glasses, the computer you're watching this on, take an automobile, the internal combustion engine, it allows the car to transport one from point A to point B. But those things, of course, wouldn't exist without intelligent life that wanted to make them and put all the pieces together. So let me read his words so you can see the way he puts the same point in his language. So it's kind of, the older fashioned language of 1800, but I think you'll get the picture. So he says here on page 31, in crossing a heath, suppose I pitched my foot against a stone and was asked how the stone got there. I might possibly answer that for all I know, to the contrary, it's been there forever. And it would not be easy to show that this is an absurd answer. But suppose that I found a watch upon the ground, and it was asked how the watch happened to be there. I would never give the answer that I gave before, that for all I know, it's always been there. But why not? Well, for this reason, and for none other, namely that when we come to inspect the watch, we perceive what we cannot see in the stone, that its several parts are framed and adjusted and put together for a purpose, that they're so formed and adjusted to produce motion, and that motion so regulated as to point out the hour of the day, that if the different parts had been differently shaped from what they are, of a different size from what they are, or placed after any other manner, or in any other order than that in which they are placed, either no motion would have been carried out, or none which would have provided the use that is now served by it. And then he goes into some details about like the function of watches and how the parts actually work. But the main point is what we've just discussed, that in viewing such an object as a watch, you know that it had to come from an intelligent designer. Why? Because it has a purpose, function, and intricate assembly of parts to produce the function. Couldn't happen randomly or on its own. It takes intelligent designer to make that happen, to make that exist. Okay, now the next point that he makes in his argument is he tries to prevent possible objections to his ultimate conclusion by mentioning different factors that would not cause somebody to doubt that the watch had a maker. So I want to help you understand this section because it could be a little confusing, but once I explain it, I don't think it'll be that bad either. So here's the header I'm going to write: factors that would not cause one to doubt that the watch had a maker. Okay, so these are listed in the text on page 32 and 33. He actually has like 8 Roman numerals for 8 points along these lines. I'm not going to mention all 8 because I think that's a little overboard, but I'm going to talk about like the 4 most essential ones that I saw there. So that's good enough. Now, one of the factors that he thinks, and we can probably agree, suppose that you've never seen a watch being made. You've never actually yourself seen the assembly or construction process of a watch. So you have never seen a watch being made. Okay, so about watches, like a lot of us have them. I'm wearing one. I've actually several other watches too. But despite that fact, I've never actually seen a watch being put together myself with my own eyes. Now, most of us probably haven't either. A lot of us own watches, but we just buy them. We just wear them. We use them. But it takes a person who has a special, interest in the whole field of watchmaking to seek out or witness or view video or like actual live assembly of a watch. I know you could, though, if you wanted to really go out on like YouTube and go to like how it's made or something. I'm sure you could find somewhere out there videos of, you know, the watchmaking procedure and all the little parts being put together, right? But most of us probably haven't actually done that. So suppose that you've never seen a watch being made, okay? If you've never seen a watch being made, question, does that make you doubt that it has a maker? Like you're thinking, well, I haven't seen it being made, so until I actually see that, I can't tell you. I have my doubts. Obviously, yeah, modern marvels, you could probably see it there. But my question is this. If, in fact, you have not seen a watch being made, is that a legit reason to doubt that it has a maker? Like, you need to see it being made to be confident that it has a maker? Or no? Tell me what you think. Do you know that it has a maker even if you have never seen it being made? Does that cause you to doubt it? Does that cause you to doubt that it has a maker, yes or no? The fact of not having seen it being made, of course not, Parker, correct. Like, it's not the case of the watch either. Like this computer that you're watching this on, I'm using a computer to broadcast. And we use them, but it takes a person a little bit more skilled in the technical aspects of how computing works to tell you what's going on with the chips and all the little electrical components and stuff, right? So you don't necessarily have to know, or sorry, have seen something been made to know that it has a maker. It's still obvious just from the basic fact that it has all this complexity and that it does perform a function. So point one, even if you've never seen a watch being made, that factor would not cause you to doubt that it has a maker. Okay? Now, why is he mentioning this point? Let me give you a sense of why he's saying this. Because if you're anticipating where the argument will ultimately go, it's going to go basically in this direction. He's going to say later on, God is like towards nature how the watchmaker is to the watch. Because there are things in nature that also have function and purpose. You know, like take the eyes that you're viewing this lecture with. The eyes perform the function of vision. And the internal complexity of all the biological components of the eye, the rods and cones and everything, that has to be extremely detailed in order for the eyes to work. So what he'll say is that there are things in nature which also exhibit purpose and function and complexity, and they therefore must have had an intelligent designer too. But in the case of those, that's God, not a watchmaker, right? So it's an analogy from the watch to the watchmaker to the case of God and the universe. So suppose that someone hits him with this response, though. I've never seen the creator, the divine being, creating the works of nature. Sorry, Peachy. She's just trying to get my attention. I gotta move her. Sorry, guys. She's so cute. Say goodbye, Peach. Bye. Yeah, okay. Don't worry, Peachy. I'll be there in 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Okay, yeah. So if you've never, you know, you could argue, oh, I don't know if God's the creator because I have not seen the works of nature being created by God. Well, in the case of the watch, you haven't seen the watch being made either, probably. But that is not some reason to doubt that it has a maker. So if a person says, I've not seen God, you know, in the divine act of creation forming the human form or whatever, that wouldn't be a really good reason to doubt that those things have a maker either, because it's still just so evident that they have been created with a purpose or function in mind. Okay, now another factor that would not cause a person to doubt that the watch has a maker is suppose that the watch has a flaw. So like I'm saying, suppose that the watch that you come across is not a properly functioning watch. Maybe it's broken. Maybe you look at it and if it's like an analog clock face, the second hand keeps ticking back and forth like an old school clock that's broken on the wall. So it's not actually recording or measuring time in the proper way. So if you see a broken watch, does that make you throw up your hands and be like, I don't know if it had a creator because this one's busted and it doesn't work right. So maybe that means this is not something that had a creator. Would that lead to doubts about the watch having a creator? Of course not. So a broken watch is still evidently an object that has a creator just because of the fact that it has a purpose, a function, and that internal complexity. Once again, right, you can imagine a person who, after his argument is complete, says, well, you claim God is the author of nature, but some of these things in nature have flaws. You know, like think of congenital birth defects, somebody's born blind. You know, is that an example of like a flaw in the organism that causes doubts as to whether it was created by God. And he's saying, no, that's not a legitimate reason to doubt that. Let me move her. Sorry, PG. All right. Had to put her to the next room. I thought she would just chill over there by herself, but I had to put her in the next room. Okay, so yeah, understand me. Even if the watch has a flaw, that's not a real legitimate reason to doubt that it has a maker either. Okay, and then third, suppose you don't know how it works. You don't know how the watch works. You don't understand how it works. Oh my God, she opened the door. Okay, I'm gonna have to be a little more aggressive closing the door. Peachy. What is this? Why isn't it closing? Peachy. My bad, guys. Peachy just causing chaos. Anyway, yeah, she wants my attention for sure. She's gonna get it though. Suppose that you don't understand how it works. So like, you see the watch, you see it's working, but you don't really understand how it works. Even if you don't know how it works. Yeah, does the cat exist when it's in the other room? I think so. If not, then what, reality is just a projection of your own mind? So right now the White House doesn't exist or the Eiffel Tower. Anyway, no, it still exists. At least I would argue so. But maybe if you're a skeptic, then who knows if even the world exists. Back to this though, you don't know how the watch works. If you don't know how it works, that still doesn't cause you to really doubt that it has a maker. Like for example, I don't really know exactly how this computer works. I have the vaguest outline in my mind of how that actually goes down, but I still know that it had to have a creator because it evidently promotes this function of computing, and it has to have this careful assembly of parts. So none of these three things cause anybody to really lose their confidence that the watch has a maker. And then the last one is nobody would say that the watch came from random chance processes. I'm writing here, the watch came about randomly. That's also not anything that can be taken seriously. Nobody would say, maybe the watch's real origins come from just chance random events. Like maybe a volcano erupted and a hurricane also occurred. And the magma and other things, the elements that were thrown up into the air, fused together. And somehow, just because of the forces of wind and the ejection of material, a watch was spontaneously formed from those random processes, and it just was sitting on the ground after the whole, chaotic event was over. No, of course not. There's no way that an unconscious, random, unguided process could produce something with a particular function and the carefully assembled parts that we see in a watch. So that would not be any real reason to doubt that it has a maker, to instead suppose that it came about from things that have no control, direction, or conscious intelligence behind them. Okay? So now, having said those points, we get to the real conclusion of his argument. And I've kind of hinted at where it's going here, so no real surprise. It becomes an analogy. The analogy pretty much drops. And he says, as things in nature stand to God, these things in nature that have got a purpose or a function are comparable to the watch for the following reason, because they also exhibit the ability to conduce to a function or to some end. Like take the eye, which he gives an example of the eye. The eye can see and has vision. And as he would argue, that is more impressive than even the most sophisticated man-made instruments for enhancing vision. This is before the era of photography, but also for capturing images. So if we thought the watch had to have a maker because of its awesome, impressive function and internal complexity, then we should have to say the same by extension of things that are found in nature that don't have a human creator, but that also do have function and purpose. So the principle that things with a purpose or function must have a creator has now been extended and applied to the works of nature. What could be the creator and the author, the designer, the intelligent designer of the works of nature. Well, it has to be something that is outside of nature in order to be able to create it. So a supernatural creator of the natural world. That's basically the idea of God. So that's how he rests his case. God must exist because that's the only way to explain the evident existence of all these naturally occurring objects that have purpose or function. He gives the example of the eye, but you could have talked about anything else in nature that also exhibits a function, like the wings of a bird, the echolocation of a bat or a marine animal, marine mammals like whales or dolphins, the digestive system, the circulatory system, the process by which plants convert light into photosynthesis so they can convert light into energy. So in all those different examples, we see things in nature that exhibit a purpose or a function and that require carefully assembled parts, biological and otherwise. So there must have been a creator of nature. I'll read his words then, and this is what he says on that point. He says, every indication of design which existed in the watch exists in the works of nature, with the difference on the side of nature of being greater and more, and that in a degree which goes beyond all computation. I mean that the design of nature surpasses the design of art in the complexity, subtlety, and curiosity of the mechanism, and still more do they go beyond them in number and variety, and are not less evidently mechanical, not less evidently designed, or accommodated to their end, or suited to their office than the most perfect creations of human invention. And then he says, I know no better method of introducing this subject than comparing a single thing with a single thing. An eye, for example, with a telescope. As far as the examination of the instrument goes, there is precisely the same proof that the eye was made for vision as there is that the telescope was made for assisting it. They are made upon the same principles, both being adjusted to the laws by which the transmission and reflection of rays of light are regulated. And then he talks a little bit about the scientific description of how vision works and how it can be compared with the technological elements of how telescopes are created. So that's really it for Mr. Paley. Last word to summarize. He starts with this finding a watch on the forest floor example. He says, okay, obviously the watch has a creator that's intelligent. We know that because it's got a function and a purpose and these very carefully arranged parts. That is seen also in nature, though, that in nature there are things that have purpose or function, any of the examples that I mentioned, and so by the same logic, they must have had an intelligent creator. And if somebody says, I'm not so sure because I have not seen God create anything, or I don't know how the workings of nature all work, like how does the brain really work? Or perhaps sometimes there are like congenital defects that are naturally occurring, and that might mean that there's flaws in the works of nature. None of those, according to him, would be real good reasons to doubt that there's a maker behind those things. So that's how he reaches his conclusion, that God stands to the world and the things in the world that have purpose as the watchmaker stands to the watch. That's how analogies are stated. I'm sure you guys, if you took SATs and stuff, they talk to you about that, right? Like A is to B as C is to D. So the watchmaker is to the watch. The watchmaker stands in relation to the watch as God stands in relation to the eye or to whatever else you want to mention from nature that has a purpose or a function. So this is the argument from design, sometimes called the argument from intelligent design. The most fancy name for it is actually the teleological argument. That's what Aristotle called it thousands of years ago in ancient Greece. I kind of think it's interesting if we call it that because then it sort of matches the sound of the other two, the ontological, the cosmological, and the teleological. And those are kind of the big three. The word teleological refers to the old Greek term telos, which means the goal or purpose of something. So this is an argument that God exists by looking at the fact that in nature there are things that have a purpose, and then analyzing that they must have come originally from this divine author, God. Okay, so we continue through our notes. The next author in this lecture series is 20th century American philosopher Ernest Nagle, and he has problematic objections. Well, I shouldn't say that. He has objections. He thinks these other arguments are problematic. So he thinks that there are issues and problems with the various arguments that we've studied for the existence of God. And so he's a person who will state criticisms. As I've said before, argument and counter-argument is the whole life of the practice of philosophy. So we learn an argument, and then we also learn what are the criticisms. So here's the next man's work. This is Ernest Nagle. Ernest Nagle lived from 1901 until 1985. And in 1959, he wrote a book. Within the book is this article that is in our text, and it's called Does God Exist? So as usual, just the author's name, his dates, the title of the writing, and the publication date. So Nagle, he was originally born in Czech Republic, but as a small child, he immigrated to America and became a citizen here. So Czech-born American citizen who taught at Columbia University for most of his career. In fact, he went to Columbia for his bachelor's degree and then went there for his master's and his PhD. So he's stayed in one institution for a long, long, long time. But yeah, he's a very good writer. He's written a lot of important work in philosophy. His own view is that he's an atheist. And so he, by definition of atheism, doesn't believe in God. That means that he has not been convinced by these philosophical arguments that God exists. So he wants to basically run through them and show the reader why he thinks that none of them prove the case that God exists. And so that's him trying to state the various different objections. So the first one that he tries to critique is the cosmological argument that we finished up today. So let's talk about what are the problems that he sees in that argument. Okay, so he tells us what's problematic about the argument in his analysis. But the first thing he does before that is that he just summarizes the argument itself so he can give the reader a sense of what he's criticizing. And just how Gaunilo gave a very good brief summary of the ontological argument before he provided his criticism, that's something that Nagle does here also. So I kind of like that because you get a very brief summary statement of the original argument. So I'll just read that and then we'll talk about his criticisms. So on page 34, he says, one of the oldest defenses of theism is the cosmological argument, also known as the argument from the first cause. So to put it briefly, this is how the argument runs. Every event must have a cause. Therefore, an event A must have as cause some event B. I'm just drawing a little diagram to help you see what he's saying. And B, in turn, must have a cause C, and so on. But if there is no end to this backwards progress of causes, then it would be an infinite sequence. That's the infinity symbol. And in the opinion of those who make the argument, an infinite series of events is impossible and absurd. So there must be a first cause, and the first cause is God, the initiator of all the change in the universe. Okay? So what he says then is, it can't be, in him restating the argument, as we know, it can't just be that there's causes and causes going back to infinity. There has to be an initial cause that starts the whole sequence to explain the reason for the whole sequence. And that is something that cannot itself be contingent. It has to be a necessary being, the first cause. That's God, and everything issues from him. Now, but what are the problems with the argument? So first of all, he says, are we really sure, though, that question, and it was questioned, that would definitely cut the legs out from the argument, because the argument says everything has to have a cause. The universe then must have one, and that's where we are on the hook of saying, well, there's got to be some cause of the universe, and it can't be contingent like the universe is. It has to be on a different level. It's got to be something necessary that causes the contingent universe. But if we say, hold on a minute, stop right away, who said everything has to have a cause? That would undermine the further steps of the argument. So the first problem is, does everything have to have a cause? Perhaps not. So you can argue maybe that, particular things have causes. Me and you know, our cause is a conception of us by our parents and stuff. And like, I don't know, the cause of this marker is the factory assembly process that produced it back in the day, wherever it came from. But you might say, well, some things, most things have causes, but not everything. Maybe not the whole universe itself. So maybe the events and the objects that are parts of the universe have to have a cause. But maybe the entire system as a whole just ultimately exists without cause. So one problem with the argument is the assumption made in the argument that everything must have a cause. And he just challenges that. He says, maybe not. But he's got more. Suppose that we do allow the point that everything must have a cause. Well, if everything has to have a cause, what do you think is the inconsistency that he wants to point out? If everything has to have a cause, then wouldn't blank also have to have a cause? If everything has a cause, then why doesn't who or what also have a cause? What do you think I'm referring to there? The force of his response. If everything has to have a cause, as the argument claims, like the universe has to have a cause, if everything has to have one, then why doesn't this thing have to have a cause? What is it? God. That's right, Parker. So that's a second question, criticism. If everything has to have a cause, then why doesn't God have to have a cause? Okay, so the second criticism or problematic aspect of the argument is it seems that the argument kind of wants to have it both ways. On the one hand, it's saying everything's got to have a cause. That's why we got to ask what caused the universe, right? That's what leads us to say it's got to be God. So it insists that everything has to have a cause, but at the same time it's saying, but don't ask what God's cause is because that thing doesn't have a cause. So how can these two statements be consistent? Everything has a cause, statement number one. Statement number two, God does not have a cause. It's like, you can't have it both ways. Either God does not have a cause, which means that not everything has a cause, or everything has a cause, and God would not be an exception to that. So you can argue that it's insisting and demanding that we see everything as having a cause, except for one thing, God. How is it that we can appreciate both principles? I thought we were supposed to be really impressed with the idea that everything has a cause, but then immediately we deny that the being which causes everything has a cause. So that's another issue. Now there are two more little objections that he makes after these. And that's where I guess we will pick up when we return on Monday. So we're definitely going to be all caught up because Monday's reading schedule is kind of light. That provides enough time for me to finish with this Nagle, talk about Paley, talk about Pascal, and then we'll try to get into W.K. Clifford. So for the weekend, if you guys have time, I would love it if you could read the Blaise Pascal article, finish with this Ernest Nagle article, and then take a look. It's very short, so it shouldn't be too much reading, but take a look at the W.K. Clifford, Ethics of Belief. So that's what we try to cover on Monday. Ethics of Belief, the finishing of Nagle, and discussion of Blaise Pascal and the wager. And then mid next week, I'll give you guys the first essay prompts. So not to worry, I'm developing the prompts and they'll be given and we'll talk about them next week, maybe on Wednesday or so. So for now then, I guess that's all I have for today's meeting. I always have office hours from 11 to 12. You don't have to go, obviously, but I'll be Zooming for the hour for anybody who wanted to drop in. If there's anyone that has any questions, that's every Friday. I sent the link earlier, so you'll find it in your emails if you look. Any questions? Are we all good? Let me know. Maybe hit the like button or something if we're good to go, or just tell me in the chat. But it seems that we are. So I appreciate you guys' work, attendance, and everything else. Have a great weekend. Stay safe, healthy, and let's just check in again on Monday at 10. For now, have a good one, all right? Thank you, guys.